Okay, so the first thing we want to do is navigate to developers.facebook.com so that we can do the appropriate authentication and generate the correct tokens to connect to Facebook Messenger. So if you select Create App on the top right and enter a display name for your application, and you'll also need to pick a category. So mine's Facebook Messenger chatbot to connect to a Facebook page, so I want to select that for pages, and then enter that security token and hit submit. It'll take you to this page, which has all the tools you need and all the different Facebook APIs there. So I want to create a Messenger chatbot, so I'm going to scroll down and select Messenger. So I want to create a token as well, and this will allow me to access the application remotely from my Node-RED-Flow. Just going to need to authenticate with Facebook first, so just going to click through that. Perfect, and that's generated an access token there, which I'll need to copy in a bit into my Node-RED-Flow. So I want to set up a webhook, so I'm going to create the callback URL, and this will enable my Node-RED-Flow to listen to the Facebook API, which is going to send messages whenever somebody talks to my page. So that's the URL for my Node-RED-Flow, and then /chatbot. Don't worry about that, we'll implement that in a second. The next thing we need to enter is a verification token, which is just used for handshaking. It doesn't matter what that is, as long as nobody else knows what it is. Yes, you'll notice the first time you do this, you get a 404 error. That's intentional. That's because our Node-RED-Flow doesn't currently do anything with that Facebook authentication, the Facebook handshaking. So I'm going to name this flow Messenger Webhooks, create a new flow and call it the same if you like. And I'm going to do a bit of processing on our Node-RED side, which is going to enable our application to listen to and authenticate with those Facebook APIs. So I'm going to want an HTTP input node and obviously a response node, a function, and a couple of debug nodes. And what this flow will do is listen to requests from Facebook Messenger. It could be message requests, it could be authentication requests, and respond to them appropriately. Just going to drag on a debug as well there. Okay, so once those nodes are on, feel free to wire them up to get them communicating with each other. Just like that, and send that to the debug as well. And that's just to give us visibility of what's going on under the covers, really see the state of our code. And that chatbot, that's where we're going to enter this. That's the callback URL. And I'm going to name this, and there's a reason for that, which I'll explain in a minute. And notice this is a GET request. So when Facebook tries to authenticate with your application and verify, it's a GET request. Okay, perfect. Just move that out of the way so it looks a bit cleaner. Fantastic. And now we're going to implement the function node, and this function node is going to process the HTTP request from the Facebook API, which is saying, are you allowed to access this content? And we're going to process that properly. And with that information, we're going to respond in the way that the Facebook API expects us to. And this will let us communicate with our Facebook page so that people can talk with our chatbot through the Messenger service. So we're going to want three variables. These are mode, which is the mode of communication, so it's where the request came from. Our vToken variable, which is the verification token, which was sent by the Messenger API, and the challenge. And the challenge is, if you're not familiar with that, it's just a case of asking for some content and it's getting an expected response. Okay, so on the message payload, so on the HTTP request, which comes from the Facebook Messenger API, there are properties that match those variables, and they're all on the hub object. So if we check that the message.payload has a mode on it, fantastic, yes it does. If it does, set our mode variable to be whatever variable came as the mode from the GET request from Facebook. Okay, the next thing we're going to want to do is exactly the same process, but this time with our verification token, which comes to us from the Facebook Messenger API on hub.verify_token. Now, if that's set, we're going to want to set our vToken variable to be that hub.verify_token, so message.payload, and then hub.verify_token. Okay, and this will set up some local variables for us that all have the same values as those from the HTTP request. Typo. Yeah, message.payload, and then hub.challenge. So if the challenge is there on the hub object, then we're going to set our local challenge variable within our Node-RED-Flow to be equal to that. This is just going to make our lives easier in a bit. Okay, set that to hub.challenge. Okay, and the final thing we need to do is, before we send the message on for the rest of our flows is check actually that the verification token is what we were expecting. So if the mode of communication from the Facebook API is subscribed, so if Facebook is trying to subscribe to the REST endpoint we're creating here, and the verification token is equal to this long string I entered just now, so go over to the developer.facebook.com page and copy your verification token, just to make sure there are no typos in it. It's important they match exactly. So if the mode is subscribed, so Facebook's trying to subscribe to our service, and the verification token is equal to the verification token that we set just now in the developer dashboard, what we want to do is set the message payload to be the challenge, and that's it. And then it'll send the appropriate challenge back to, the appropriate challenge response back to the developer API. Okay, so now when we hit verify and save, it should all go through perfectly fine, and it has. And that's closed for us now, and we're back at the Messenger API dashboard. And you'll notice at the bottom under webhooks it says complete because we're subscribed appropriately, and I'm going to need to connect that to a page. Now, when you select a page here, and I've only got one page, which is the DeveloperWorks Watson chatbot, and I'm going to subscribe to that. So when you subscribe to that page there, what's happening is Facebook is connecting your webhook, which says where to send the data to that page. So when somebody types in Messenger on that page, it'll send that information to wherever that webhook is. And in our case, that's our Node Redflow. Okay, and I've just created a page access token again there, or copied it to clipboard because I'll need that in a bit. So that's verification sorted, but how do we handle the actual messages when they come through? Well, to do that, we're going to need an HTTP input node and an HTTP response node again, which should come as no surprise at this stage, because we want to handle requests from the Facebook page, and a debug node just so that in fact two debug nodes here, just so that we see exactly what's going on within our application. It makes debugging a bit easier. Okay, so once that's done, feel free to join the dots. I'm going to want to connect the HTTP request to the function node, which needs two outputs here, one to go to the HTTP response and one to go to the debug node there. Okay, so just wire those two up. Perfect. And then on this input node, notice that I'm changing the method from get, which is what the request was for the verification webhook, to post. So when the Facebook API sends information from the Messenger window, it's a post request. So we're looking for post requests on the /chatbot URL, not get requests. Okay, when that comes in, we're going to want to do a bit of processing. And basically that processing is going to be to retrieve everything that comes through as part of that web request. So the time of the request, what the contents of the message was, all of those different bits of information, just to process those a little bit to make it cleaner and send the specific bit we want onto our chatbot eventually. So if the message payload came from a page, which of course we hope it did, if somebody's messaging our Facebook page, so if it comes from a page, then what we want to do is check that there's an entry in there, so it's not just a blank object being sent from a page. And if that entry exists, what we want to do is create an entry object which equals that, and that's just because we're going to iterate over it in a second, and we're going to retrieve the different key bits of information from that entry object. Okay, so let's have a for loop to iterate over it. So for I equals 0, while I is less than the size of the entry object, so entry.length, we want to increment I, so I++. Perfect. So within this for loop then, we want to look at several different things. The first is the page ID, so you might have guessed it, that's the ID of the page that sent the request, that sent the data to our Node Redflow, and that's on entry_i.id, so that's the ith entry of the entry object, the ID property. And there's also the time of the event, which is in the same place. So the entry array, the ith object, the ith entry dot time. Brilliant. And the last thing is the message itself. So this is the messaging data. So what was sent, who sent it, that kind of thing. So entry I dot messaging there. Brilliant. So now we want to iterate over that messaging data that gets sent to retrieve the message object itself, the text that they sent, the bit that we're really interested in. So another for loop, So var j equals 0, j is less than messaging.length, brilliant, and then increment j. Okay, so if that's the case, so if there is a message on that messaging object, so if there's actually text being sent, what we're going to do is we're going to have our function node in Node-RED, the one that we're writing the code in now, fire. So it's going to send a message, and the message first of all we're going to change what it sends. So we're going to add a property, so messaging event. So message.messaging event equals the message that was sent via Facebook, and we're going to then send, and we're going to send that message. So what this will do is every time somebody sends a message to Facebook, to our Facebook page, this Node-RED flow is listening, we're subscribed to it, and we're going to fire every time a message gets sent. Okay, so just to check that works, or to check that there's a messaging event, what I'm going to do is edit this second debug node. So instead of printing the message.payload, it prints that messaging.messaging event.